Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today as co-host is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very well. Good. It's been a hectic weekend keeping up with the news, but it looks like Syria is still in the news. So we're going to be talking about Syria, but we have a very special guest today, somebody that knows a lot about this. Matter of fact, she happens to be calling in from Damascus, and that is our friend Vanessa Beeley, and she's been on our program several times before, and she right now is in Damascus and was there when the bombs fell. Vanessa, welcome to our program today.
Thank you so much for having me back on.
Very good. Why don't you give us a quick update about your experience since you're there, and were you actually close enough, and I guess it didn't have to be real close to hear some bombs going off. Tell us what you just went through over this weekend and what was the most interesting, the most significant, and maybe even frightening.
Well, I think the most extraordinary thing is the reaction of the Syrians. I mean, on the night the bombing, or the early hours of the morning that the bombing happened, we'd actually lost internet even in the hotel for about 2 or 3 hours, which is very, very unusual. And I think a few people had an inkling that maybe something was coming later that evening. And at about, I think it was around 3:55, the noise started. I wouldn't say that the bombing, because nothing actually seemed to hit the ground, but we could hear explosions in the air. But I think what was extraordinary, and maybe what people don't realize, is that the reaction of the Syrian people was actually, rather than dive for the basement, was to go out onto the roof and see what was happening. And the very simple reason for that was that Syria had prepared for this attack for some time. And in fact, their air defense systems, although antiquated compared to, American, for example, were very effective. Their missile jamming systems, signal jamming systems, worked extremely well. They intercepted something like 70 missiles. And actually, the infrastructure damage was minimal, to be honest. And there were, as far as I know, no casualties either. We haven't had an update on that, so I stand to be corrected if there have been casualties announced today. But as far as I'm aware, there were no casualties from the attacks.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seemed like, that people did go out the next day and there was a lot of relief. But if you could, what did it feel like, do you think, for the average Syrian? I mean, to me, it seems like sitting and waiting for a bunch of missiles to come. You don't know where they're going to hit. Are they going to hit your house, your neighborhood? I mean, did it feel sort of terrorizing to be there?
To be honest, Daniel, I think the psychological warfare came beforehand with the threatening. And I was actually with a Syrian family that afternoon, and they said to me, look, in our view, we'd rather they just get on with it, because then we can deal with it. While we're sitting here waiting for this to happen, it's the worst feeling in the world, because you just don't know how bad it's going to be, what they're going to target, whether they're going to hit civilian areas, whether they're only going to hit military bases, etc. It's the not knowing which is actually psychologically the most stressful for these people who've already gone through 7 years of a terrorist war here. And having, particularly for the people in Eastern Ghouta who've literally just been liberated days previously from 6 years of a terrorist occupation. So I think really for many people it was almost a sense of relief. I know that sounds crazy, but it was a sense of relief in the sense that it was really happening. The Syrian Arab Army was dealing with it, and at around 6 a.m. civilians were out in Umayyad Square, which is very close to where I am, dancing literally in the streets and celebrating what they considered to be a victory. And then to a huge extent it is a victory for Syria, because Russia did not intervene at all in this defense. It was purely Syrian. And so I think what it did was it demonstrated that they are able to defend themselves against what was a concerted attack for a number of hours. And so I think from the Syrian perspective now, there is a sense of stronger defiance and a belief in their ability to deal with that level of attack if it comes in again.
And since this was a lot PR and psychological, you're indicating that if there is going to be a winner in these last 2-day events, you would say the Syrians are better off than they were. Is that the way you would put it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would put it that the Syrians have won a battle that actually prevented us going to war. Because had Russia actually intervened, say Russia had retaliated during that attack and had it exchanged weaponry, for example, or exchanged shots with the tripartite unlawful criminal alliance, we have to say, because there was nothing justified legally about this attack, then potentially we could have been tipped into a larger conflict. But the very fact that Syria took care of this defense and dealt with it very effectively, I truly believe that prevented it heading into catastrophe.
Very good.
Vanessa, as we know, these strikes, at least according to the U.S. news, was retaliatory strikes for the alleged Assad attack in Douma. You've been on the ground. You haven't exactly been to Douma yet. You're hoping to get there, I think. But just talking to Syrians on the ground, what is the sense across the spectrum about what might have happened there? Is the U.S. right or wrong or something in the middle?
No, I mean, this is no. And I think the fact that Moscow is being quite so belligerent about the evidence that they have. I mean, they've just put out another statement saying that irrefutably this was a UK intelligence exercise. It was a false flag. They might have been aided by the United States. That's a statement that's just gone out literally just now. Robert Fisk of The Independent actually went into Douma at 1 o'clock today. Somebody's just messaged me to let me know that. And he confirms the following. The footage is authentic. He could recognize the location. He spoke to doctors there who said that children were admitted coughing and spluttering, but they were admitted as a result of nearby shelling and dust fumes and smoke. Somebody created panic by shouting gas attack, chemical attack, and then they began the theatrics of hosing people down and filming. Now, this is in line, so this is coming from Robert Fisk of The Independent, and this is in line with the interviews with 2 of the actual doctors and volunteers who were in the hospital at the time, who also basically gave the same narrative a couple of days ago in interviews with Arabic channels here. So basically Robert Fisk has gone in and through talking to civilians there, he's confirming the same narrative, that this was definitely a staged event. The US and the UK and France are claiming that they have this sort of secret evidence, but they don't appear to be able to get much beyond the social media chatter, which the Pentagon was also basing its entire findings upon.
And I think France as well was saying social media.
Yeah.
But Vanessa, what do you make of these gruesome pictures of bodies, particularly children's bodies? You know, we have seen them. People would say, well, how can you dispute this? Look at these bodies.
Look, again, this is very hard to say without having been in there and without actually talking to people. But one thing has to be made very clear. Jaish al-Islam, which is the Saudi-financed group that was occupying Douma, had held thousands of prisoners, many of them kidnapped in Adra, an area to the north, in 2013, women and children. It's very difficult to speculate because, as I say, I haven't spoken to civilians there to see whether the scenes that you're seeing were filmed, of the bodies themselves. Certainly there are a lot of anomalies about those images. I mean, I think even one BBC researcher, Riem Dalati on Twitter, pointed out the fact that the bodies had been rearranged after the initial event. They'd been moved and placed in a position for the greatest photographic impact. Now, when I was in another area of Eastern Ghouta in Zamalka, which was one of the areas affected in 2013 by the then alleged chemical weapon attack, I did speak to civilians who told me of the staging of events and of the kidnapping of children to be used in those events, the drugging of those children, and the fact that many parents there who lost children in these alleged attacks did not see their children before they were buried. So, what I'm in the process of doing right now is just piecing together the testimonies that I'm getting from these various areas of Eastern Ghouta. So it's very hard to draw firm conclusions right now, but certainly it's looking as if many of these events were staged. Many of them were, psyops, basically, to facilitate further military intervention on a humanitarian basis.
Vanessa, let's assume OPCW does get to go in there and do a thorough examination. How much reliability do you place them? Would you be able to pretty well accept what they say, or do you still have some questions? What kind of reputation do they have in your estimation?
Well, I think we've seen, OPCW were actually invited to Damascus by the Syrian government. That needs to be made very clear. And OPCW have an agreement with the Syrian government since 2013 that they can come at the behest of the Syrian government and work inside Syria with the security of the Syrian government and their Russian allies. Now, there is a rumor going around at the moment that the Syrians and Russians are preventing OPCW getting to Douma. That's not true. What I've actually heard here is that OPCW, although they don't need it, are insisting upon a UN Security Council permission or mandate to be able to go into Douma. And of course, that is currently being blocked by the US and I believe London also. I just had a message in now. So I think, we're seeing it's very hard to disentangle the truth from the various conflicting reports that you're getting at the moment. But certainly as far as the Syrian government is concerned, there is no issue with OPCW going into Douma. What they will then report upon, we've had Robert Fisk go in today basically confirming the Russian narrative. So it will be very interesting to see to what extent pressure will be brought to bear upon the OPCW. My feeling is, of course, there will be pressure, and unfortunately, I think OPCW can be pressured, let's put it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. But getting back to the bombing, Vanessa, I don't know, there's so many contradictions, there are so many very bizarre things about this, but now, you suggested, and the Russian and Syrians suggested that they shot down some, I think 70 or so out of the 103 missiles that were fired. The U.S. claims, of course, that none were shot down. So let's take the U.S. narrative. Let's take the U.S. claim at face value. This site at Barzeh, the U.S. claims it's a chemical weapons facility. The Syrians claim, I believe, that it's some sort of a pharmaceutical facility. But according to the U.S. narrative, 71 missiles hit those three relatively small buildings. They're not bunkers, they're not reinforced buildings. They look like just regular buildings. Does this make any sense to hit these three buildings with 71 missiles?
No, and I honestly don't believe that narrative for 1 second. There has been footage going out of the Barzeh center. There were two centers, Jamraya and Barzeh. Barzeh is to the north of Damascus. So I can honestly tell you, hand on heart, had 70 missiles hit that area, we would have known about it here where I am. We're probably only about I'd say 10, 15 kilometers from there, so it's no distance at all. We would have certainly felt that impact if even 35 missiles had hit that area. And also, it's surrounded by a residential area, so had that number of missiles hit, we would have seen a lot more casualties. But just coming back to the US claims that they've degraded Syria's chemical weapon capability, in both of these alleged chemical weapon manufacturing centers, so in Jamraya and in Barzeh. The OPCW had gone into those centers in November 2017 and had declared them as adhering to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and not manufacturing chemical weapons, and perfectly within norms, both of them. There have been interviews with technologists and scientists who've been working in both centers, and they have told us quite categorically that they were manufacturing a number of pharmaceutical items, including anti-venom medicines, and particularly cancer medicines. Now, Syria is already under crippling economic sanctions. I would actually call it economic terrorism, which has already decimated the humanitarian medical sector here in Syria, making it impossible to take care of its own people. And cancer is one of the sectors that has been worst hit. So effectively, what the United States coalition has done here is to further decimate the Syrian state's ability to take care of their own people on a medical basis. And one other point, had this been a chemical weapon manufacturing center, as I said, it's in a densely populated civilian area. Had there been chemical weapons on there, surely we would have seen further deaths from the dispersal of those chemical elements from the bombing.
Right. It's funny that, not funny, it seems obvious, why haven't more people challenged that? If there were manufacturing of chemical weapons there, and our plan is to bomb the living daylights out of them, they must have been assured there'd be no chemicals there. But so few, that understanding is not made in our media at all. We don't hear anything about it. All we ever hear is we have to go in because we have this monster who has gassed his own people. And they say it over and over again. So that is, I think, what you do and you're reporting is trying to refute that because it just isn't true. And yet that's what I think most Americans go along with. Every politician in Washington practically are saying, well, he gassed his own people. I know we shouldn't do this, but we have to do it. Well, monster is gassing his own people. And where's the evidence? And where are the people who will, at least come close to what you're doing and trying to report the truth?
I think what's also extraordinary, Dr. Paul, I mean, if you look at let's follow, the corporate media line here and say that President Assad, because it's always just him, is attempting to gas his own people in eastern Ghouta. We have the same situation that we had in eastern Aleppo. If that were the case, why then are those same people leaving those areas liberated from the terrorist factions and coming into the government-held areas? Surely at that point it would be the easiest thing in the world to gas those people that he's allegedly been trying to gas previously. Right. I mean, if people follow this narrative through, they must surely reach a brick wall at a certain point where they say, but there's no logic to this. None. And plus, I mean, I'd entered areas of eastern Ghouta in the last sort of 10 days, and I've seen at least two, and there's a third one that has been found, chemical weapon manufacturing sites within the terrorist-held areas. And I've seen basically instruction notebooks showing them how to mix white phosphorus with napalm in hand grenades and small munitions that are then fired into the civilian areas of Damascus city centre, but also into the areas of eastern Ghouta to collectively punish the civilians there, which is again a sort of repeat performance of what they were doing in East Aleppo towards the end of the military campaign to liberate those areas.
Yes, as Ambassador Peter Ford, who was the former UK ambassador to Syria, said, a child could see through this. And as a matter of fact, we're having him on our show on Thursday, so we're really looking forward to talking to him. But I have one other question, Vanessa. Now, it all goes back to the claims about this attack. Whereas, of course, according to international law, even if he did carry out this attack, it still would not be legally justified without a UN resolution. But that aside, the claims, as far as we can see, and even the French have admitted it, social media, but these claims have come from two sources, as I can understand. The White Helmets and the Syrian American Medical Association, the only two sources that are providing this. You've done a lot of work on these. If you can just give us another quick synopsis and remind people, what are these organizations?
Well, I mean, the White Helmets is a multi-million-dollar financed propaganda construct. I mean, actually, Roger Waters of Pink Floyd at a concert in Spain has just basically publicly described them as a propaganda construct working with the terrorist factions inside Syria. So basically, they are part of the intelligence operation, primarily being financed by the UK, but also by the US via US aid and a number of intermediaries, to produce the propaganda against the Syrian government and the Syrian army, to act as human shields for the terrorist factions, and to basically produce these staged events And then we have the Syrian American Medical Society, which is a largely Muslim Brotherhood organization based in the US, that again in East Aleppo, we saw that they had been working closely with particularly Nusra Front, in the Nusra Front controlled hospitals in East Aleppo. And it appears that they've been running a very similar operation in Eastern Ghouta. The one other organization that has produced information on this alleged event is the Violations Documentation Center, the VDC. Now, this organization is also funded by Ayman Asfari and George Soros. But Ayman Asfari, of course, financed and set up Syria Campaign, and Syria Campaign is running the public relations for White Helmets. So if there are any of these attacks, Syria Campaign are producing the hashtags, they're producing the memes, the images, and so on, and they are basically promoting the White Helmets into Western public. So this entire sort of cabal that has produced the evidence that the US, the UK, and France in particular have based this attack upon are seriously compromised organizations. And the very fact that we've gone to war based on their evidence is a terrifying prospect.
Now, I can't resist one tiny more question. I know, Dr. Paul, we need to close up soon, but one tiny last one. And this is about Nikki Haley, our illustrious U.S. ambassador to the UN. Over the weekend, she said, "We are locked and loaded and ready to strike again if he gasses his people again." Doesn't this seem like an invitation if this was staged by terrorists? Isn't this like a green light in places like Idlib and elsewhere where the terrorists still have control? Send out some gas, we're coming in. You know?
Yeah, I mean, basically, yes. I mean, that was one of the kind of negative fallouts, if you like, from this attack, was that it could potentially embolden the terrorist factions. And in fact, the day after ISIS or Daesh attacked Syrian Arab Army positions in Yarmouk, which is the Palestinian suburb to the south of Damascus. And we've seen a few mortars actually coming into civilian areas from that area of Damascus. So the fear is, and you know I sort of predicted this chemical attack previously on your show. If I have one fear, it is that the terrorists or the White Helmets are going to produce another chemical weapon attack because they perceive that it elicits the response that they're looking for. And you know, today I think it was Arwa Damon of CNN. Was actually, I can't actually believe I'm saying this, she was sniffing people's bags in Idlib to prove that they had effectively been involved in a chemical weapon attack in Douma. So this is the bottom of the barrel that we've actually reached as far as mainstream media propaganda is concerned.
Well, Vanessa, I want to thank you for being with us today. We're going to go ahead and close out. But before we do, I want to thank you very much for your participation in trying to get real news out and counteracting all the fake news. And to do that, we need more people reading and studying exactly what you're doing on a daily basis. And I would like you to tell our viewers what they can do to keep up to date the best way possible on what you're doing and what you're writing.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Can you give us your websites where you're publishing and where they can go to find your work?
Oh, sorry. It's sorry, the sound went a little bit then. It's up at 21st Century Wire, which has actually been under attack for 3 or 4 days, but it's up and running again now.
Oh, wonderful. And thank you very much again for being with us, and I hope we can get you back soon. I want to thank our viewing audience today for tuning in to this very important program, and come back soon to the Liberty Report.